program ahead of us. This topic has never been the subject of a program here at Willard, and we have a very special speaker tonight. We first met her in recent years when she came here as an intern from USI, and she graduated from USI, picked up a graduate degree, is now teaching at USI as well, and she's also returned to Willard again, working here part-time in the archive. So we're really pleased to have her on our staff, and I think you're going to enjoy this program very much. And I'd like you to meet Ms. Janis Bois.
Hi everyone, thank you Pat. I appreciate the honor and privilege of speaking here this evening. As you know, I have a graduate degree and I also teach in my other life in addition to the research that I perform here at Willard Library. I very much enjoy what I do. It's very much a passion of mine. Before I get started into the research that I can talk for days on, but I promise I'll keep it to the amount that we promised you. I do have a sign-up sheet in the back on that table. If you're so moved, please give me your contact information or at least your name. That way in the future I can put a face with a name if you come in and do some research. If you might be interested in more of this information that I'm giving you tonight, that way I can get back with you in the future as well. I won't be distributing it to Willard Library or anywhere else. It stays with me, I promise. So that's that. In terms of my research, I started this project in 2009. Before I go any further, can everybody hear me okay? The loud face awesome. Good. Okay, so in terms of this research, Pat was good enough to give me a wonderful topic. I had a few options when I started as an intern here, but I chose this particular topic because it was women's history, a big passion of mine. And I really like the post-Civil War Reconstruction era. That's where this falls in. Now, Emily was 27 years old when she married, when she was engaged. She was 28 when she married, I apologize. But this was 1893 to 1894. You'll find some things that are consistent with that time period for women, and some things that are not quite as consistent. You'll see that when we get there. Before we get to that point, let me give you a brief overview of Emily Orr. First thing you want to know is, well, she didn't just appear as a 27, 28-year-old, right? Hopefully. So we have a baby picture, about 9 months old. This is 1866, as I put on here. Now, I found a later picture of her that we have on our website. This one is noted as Connect 5472, if you're interested. Unless it's noted otherwise, they come from the photos and the manuscripts originate from the Emily Orr Clifford collection. So, this is from the Clifford collection, this is from the Connect collection, all here at Willard Library. Now, obviously that's not the latest photo that we have of her, but it was one of the best preserved that I could find in the collection. So, you have her birth, her death. 1952 is when she died. And you have when she was married, the topic of tonight's presentation. And specifically, when we move a little closer to the time period that we're talking about, we have her childhood. So I'll give you the basic timeline rundown. 9 months old, we've already seen, 3 years old. You can see how wealthy she was by her shoes, as well as her other articles of clothing. Additionally, we have her with her sister Martha. Anyone ever hear of Martha before? Yeah. Later, Martha, you might know? Shanklin? Denby?
No.
Okay, Martha Denby. There was Lizzie Shanklin, cousin. Everybody familiar with that? Shanklin? Okay, cool. So that gives you a bit of an idea of where we're going. She was 4 years old in this photograph as well. And that's just to give you an idea of what she used to look like. Additionally, when we return to the next slide, we have a little bit closer to the time period we're talking about. Now, consider the fact that these are very old photos, right? 1800s. Pretty well preserved. These are the original photos. I didn't retouch any of these. So, pretty impressive. You'll notice that this one was done by Douglas Photography in Evansville, a fairly famous photographer. So you'll see a lot of those in our portraits that we have here at Willard Library. But that's just a brief overview of what she used to look like. Now, this photograph is, of course, from the Illinois Oral Collection, and this is when she was 27 years old, about the time when she embarked on her journey to her trip around the world. Now, this particular photo was retouched a bit. I darkened it, because over time the photograph that we had that was the original was a bit faded. So I will give you that. That's the only one I retouched. Now, just to give you an idea of my research methodology, which I've explored a little bit with you, I have the timeline of whenever I presented as well, in addition to when I started this particular research project. I can tell you that in Phi Alpha Theta Regional Conference in the spring of 2009 was the first time I presented this information as an undergraduate student. I was hired at Willard Library in fall of 2015, where I continued my research. I last spoke on this topic, a prior short version, if you will, last semester at USI as a faculty member. So that gives you an idea of how long I've been researching and working on this project. Now, in terms of what I've selected for tonight, it's very condensed from what I can tell you. Eventually, I'd like to make this into a book. That's the goal. But for right now, I focus on the letters, the photographs, and then some other background information to make her relevant to today, not just a historic figure. Additionally, in terms of these letters that I've transcribed from EOC to GSC, and would work with her to George Sontag Clifford. George Sontag Clifford was her fiance at the time. I have also digitized photographs from her trip. The internship that I did consisted of over 150 hours in one semester over about a 15-week period of time. Additionally, I did some more digitization of photographs and letters when I started here in September of last year. That's when I expanded the project quite a bit. The portion of the research project is a result of over 50 additional hours, give or take. Sometimes we discount, right? So that's the basic background of what I've actually done. We have some community connections with Emily Moore. She established the Evansville chapter of the Red Cross. Anybody know that before now? Okay. She was instrumental in founding the Evansville Philharmonic as well. Bad joke, I didn't. Her husband, George Sontag Clifford, later on anyway, 1894, founded Evansville College, now known as UOB. Did anybody know that? She was the first female Evansville College, i.e. UOB, Board of Trustees member. And then she was the granddaughter of Samuel Orr, the founder of the Iron Company in Evansville, Indiana. That gives you a brief rundown. Her father was James L. Orr, and we'll talk a little bit about him in a minute because he was part of the trip around the world. Now, speaking of, this next slide that depicts Emily during the time period in which she would have gone on her trip around the world includes information on who she was accompanied by. James Orr, as I already told you, her father, he went on this trip, as well as her sister Martha Orr, whom we've already explored a bit. Then we have Secretary of State under President Harrison, yes, the United States President, who is John Foster. You might hear of him. Okay, I see. Good. Well, he was born in Evansville, raised here. So, who knew? A lot of people don't know that. Now, his wife also accompanied him on the trip. Mary Parker Foster, you might hear of her? You want to tell me about Susie?
She's the third President General, which means President of the whole Daughters of the American Revolution.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for that.
And that's her picture upstairs on the second floor.
I was going to get to that, but I wasn't sure that. That's okay. Hey, it's good to have more than one source of the information. It truly is. Now, before I begin on the rest of this journey with you about our trip around the world, I did want to show you a primary source document, not retouched in the least. This is part of a scrapbook page, if you will. About half of it, And this is the route that she took on the steamer. I have the name of the steamer up at the top, and you can actually research it. There are a lot of documents and other websites that you can find information on that particular steamer as well. So that gets us started. Now, in terms of what I have to discuss with you, I want to talk a little bit about Emily Shaw Orr, her full name, later known as Emily Orr Clifford. She was born just after the U.S. Civil War, as we know, 1866, correct? Now, that becomes important because while she was born to a prominent family, there was also a connection to the Civil War, United States Civil War, I should say. Her father, James L. Orr, was a veteran of the U.S. Civil War. Hence why she was involved in creating the Evansville chapter of the Red Cross. Now, additionally, she was able to go to college because of her prominent family and wealth. Not something everyone got to do at that time period, as we well know. Now, eventually she became engaged to George Tonti Clifford, which we do know already. During that engagement, she had a 9-month-long journey, as we see depicted here in terms of the steamer ship route. And additionally, the trip involved a range of meetings with dignitaries, as well as discovering traditions of certain cultures. But she wasn't just concerned with famous people or wealthy people on this trip. She was very concerned with the everyday common person. While she was wealthy, she wanted to know the everyday experience of each citizen of each region that she visited. So it was a very different clue into who she was. We'll get there, there's a lot about her. Now, she arrived across the Atlantic via steamship. The travel allowed for time for her to write to her then fiance. Sometimes it was based on love, sometimes it was based on culture she was observing. Sometimes it was a person in the passenger seat next to her. Happened a lot. But when you're on a ship for a while, who wouldn't? You gotta entertain yourselves. But she amassed a great amount of the total number of letters while she was on this travel route to and from the United States. Now, she mentioned several times throughout her letters that the travel pattern that they took involved a bit of a tumultuous area in terms of the water, which we could probably guess. Well, a lot of times, as you'll see in some of the letters that I've scanned, I have one as an example of her good writing, but in some of her letters that I have transcribed, it's very shaky, very hard to read, and she even laments in there, in that letter, that she says, well, it's not really my best handwriting, but it's the best I can do when we're being tossed and turned on this journey. So, real life happens even despite trying to make the letter sound good. Additionally, there are instances in which her letters reflected the rapidly moving waters, as I mentioned, and while she was on the steamship, she would talk about people, also known as people watching, which I mentioned already a bit. Well, she created letters which sometimes read as gossip columns, if you will. At other times, it was very much about the human condition. Whether someone was of wealth, whether someone was a coach, doesn't matter to her. She picked everybody as a focal point. Of course, Emily focused most letters on the people she knew while traveling. She would run into certain people. And she would explain to George at the time, this is how I know them. You should know them too, whether you do or not. And by the way, when I get back, we're married, we're going to have dinner with them. Dinner parties are a big deal then. Later on, she talked about heartbreaking reasons why passengers were on the travel as well. Some were going to funerals back home in the motherland. Some Ireland, some France, just depended on where they were going. Keep in mind, they embarked out of New York, the United States, for this journey. Now, when Emily was not writing about the events of the steamship, she was writing of cultures, love, and confusion. I told you a little about the cultures and the love. We'll get to those in a second. But the confusion part, what do I mean there? We'll get to that. Whenever she was visiting countries such as China, Japan, and India, among others, she was talking about the importance of her meetings with government officials in terms of how they would affect the common person, her in general for her life, as well as the government itself in the United States, as well as in either of those countries that I mentioned. Now, she spent a great deal of her time in Asia. Although she did visit Egypt, she did visit some places in Europe, and she did visit some other places in the Middle East. So keep that in mind. Specifically, while visiting the marketplace in Japan, she noted something rather different and odd about the culture. They were boiling cats. Yeah. She had an interesting reaction to her letter as well. But something that we wouldn't normally hear about in the United States at that time. But by her account, we know that they were doing that practice for food as a cultural sign. Now, specifically, in India, she spoke of the religious events she witnessed on a daily basis. Anybody guess? All the above so far? Yeah. Various religious practices specifically. Now, additionally, throughout her travels, in terms of land-based, when she got into photos of interest or people of interest or cultural significant issues, she limited some of the means by which the group from Evansville traveled. Keep in mind there were several. And they were wealthy. For instance, at one point, there were oxen drawn to a cart that carried them where they needed to go. It was not very comfortable, apparently. One can only imagine. That said, during this time, Emily also described as many of the famous landmarks and events, as well as the lesser-known citizens of each country's daily habits as she could fit on a page. As I'll show you later in her letter, she would write on the front, the middle, then the back, then turn it around, turn it upside down, and write in every little nook and cranny she could. Because paper was scarce and it was important to write down. So it's been transcribing this. Additionally, she talked about the daily habits of basic observances that she saw to her fiance, because it was important to her to share her travels since he couldn't go with her. That was a culturally significant part of this trip. It was about finding yourself and becoming more educated on different cultures as a personal account. Now, she talked about the state in which people, buildings, and events would be found in her collection in terms of the photographs, which we'll see in a little bit, a selection of those. But she also talked about the emotional aspect of her trip. The one which stuck out to me, and this is my bias, I realize, in terms of a letter where she was giving an account of a particular area that really made an impact on her emotionally, was Pompeii. She saw that there were women who were frozen in time, if you will, who were trying to shield their children from the hot ash and lava. And it impacted her in terms of knowing that such a large civilization was wiped out, despite the fact that there were some warnings. But that was the biggest impact on me in terms of reading these letters. It might be different from each person who reads them. You never know. Now, when she talked about the scene where a mother attempted to block her children from the volcanic ash and lava flow, she wanted to make sure that we knew it was in Constitution. Anybody know why? Landmarks. Because we have to know what she's talking about. So she didn't just assume we knew what she was talking about, right? Or which particular lava or volcano was spewing the lava. That was the big one. Now, when she was writing up her love to Georgetown Clifford, here we get to that part, she was engrossed in counting down the many days until her return to Evansville to see him again, as you would expect. That said, she found that the longer she stayed away from the Ohio River City, she would rather stay in one of the many places to which she had traveled. At one point, she stated in a letter that she no longer considered herself faithful to George. Thus, she removed her engagement ring. It wasn't really mentioned in any other subsequent letters, however, and I only have her side to George at the time. I don't have his side back. So there are some gaps in time as well as in said, Evansville is stupid. But she also said, never tell anyone she said that. But it's important because she did come back. And as we know, she was very prominent in Evansville's history and in our society. And the fact that she created the Evansville Red Cross when she returned. She created the Philharmonic. Helped anyway. And the fact that she was very much like a common person. She created a lot of food drives, a lot of money drives to make sure that people who were less fortunate were taken care of. And in her letters, she told George that that was her main focus when she was going to return to Evansville because of the poverty she had seen in all those other countries. That's why she wanted to see what the lesser man was experiencing, rather than just see where the rich people lived and how they lived. Now, much in terms of her legacy of philanthropy, there was also the education aspect, in the fact that she and George were instrumental in creating Evansville College. We don't hear as much about her, though. We hear about George creating it, but she was the one who pushed him into creating this wonderful college. So that's a little fun fact that you find in researching this information. Now, when it came to reading these letters about her journey, one can discover many insights into her character. She was consistently an activist for those who were not noticed in society or otherwise heard. We know that much. She also included a great deal of humor in her letters, as we know. But it's hard to depict exactly who she was without knowing her. She included a lot of information regarding the human condition, as I mentioned before. She also was a bit rebellious. Okay? Thinking about the time period, thinking about she's a woman, trying to be a mover and a shaker in a man's world. Okay? But specifically, she stayed classy. She stayed true to who she was, even while doing things that might not have been exactly ladylike at times, in terms of speaking up. Now, when I talk about the projector screen in a minute, I'm going to show you some examples of primary source documents. Keep in mind that it's just a sampling of what we have in the collection. It was very difficult to pick just a few photographs and a letter here or there, but I wanted to make sure that we kept to the time frame, and I also wanted to make sure that other people are interested in the topic. Because if I gave you all of the information, you will want to come in and look at it. Yeah, there's no material over there. Okay, so moving on to that part, I do want to draw your attention to John Foster. This is a photograph that we have here at Willard Library, the Meyer Schlamp collection, number 251 for the photograph if you're interested. It's also on our website. Now, this is an example of a letter that she wrote to George Thorndyke Clifford during their engagement. As you can see, it's in cursive, which is important. You can also tell that she used every aspect of that page to write on. And this is an old envelope. Interesting that we don't have a zip code for Evansville. I'm secret photo. So we didn't get super specific. Okay. And this is only one of over hundreds of letters that are so, moving on. This is one of the many photographs that we have. There were two main boxes, and the photographs are about this long, and about that tall, in terms of movement. Now, scanning them was fun, because they're not exactly straight. Some of them are on papyrus, some of them are on just a weird form of cardstock, if you will, for the time. So it makes it a little challenging, but that's what we deal with when we deal with primary source documents. But it was fun. Now, there was no description on the photograph other than Egypt. Kind of figured that with pyramids, though. Yeah, that was my first clue. But we don't really have any other information, right? Who were these people? Did they just happen to be writing animals right there? Who knows? But it's interesting interesting that we have a grouping of people that are not identified, rather than here's someone famous, here's their title, here's how they act in society, etc., versus someone who is just passing by being born. Now, again, we have a picture from Egypt, but this one has a description, the ascent of the Great Pyramid. Keep in mind, 1893 to 1894. That's how old these photos are. All I did was crop them. I did not distort any of the things that you'll see on there. I didn't do anything with darkening or lightening the photo. So they're in really good shape. Next, we have the stone elephant in Delhi, India. Pretty massive. So we've seen some random people, some landmarks, some culture. Now you get to more people doing everyday things. So just people on a boat fishing in Ceylon. Another place she visited. This gets a little bit more interesting. So we have the temple burning ghats, bathing ghats. Either way is acceptable. And Benares, India. I wish I could make it bigger for you. It's amazing when you can come up here and really look at all of these people and how massive the structures are right on the water. Now, there is a description, and the good news is I typed it out for you. This is her handwriting in the late wars, and at times you have to wonder, what did she write? Been there. So, it says, on the bank of the river Ganges, bodies are burned and ashes poured on water. Nearest relative lights the fire. Pilgrims bathe in sacred water and visit innumerable temples to wash away their sins and get merit. Rich men build temples on bank of river to acquire merit. Verbatim what she wrote. In reference to the previous slide. This is Yokohama Street in Japan. Hey, another photo back then. No, just checking. This was hand tinted after it was photographed. That's how we got that. You know how long that had to take? I wish I knew. A lot longer than just taking a photograph of my video. Now, we have a tea house in Japan. This was a meeting with dignitaries. Emily Orr, John Foster. We even have in another book, in a scrapbook, all of these nameplates that are signed by each person who visited from the United States. So it's very fascinating to have all those artifacts. Going back to Ceylon a little bit, she had fruits photographed. That's a curveball, huh? But it's important to know where your produce comes from and different resources. That was a major factor in everything she wanted to have captured. We have Akbar's tomb near Agra, India. You can see the landscaping, but when you put your hand here, and you look how tall that is compared to the tree, it's amazing. We also have the Victoria Railway Station in Bombay, India. This is one of my favorites. I'll put my bias in there, you know what we're doing. But it's quite amazing. A lot different from what we would see here in the United States in terms of architecture. Now here are just some everyday life civilians in different countries. We have Korea and India, and just to be on the safe side, Korea's over here, India's over here. It cut off the bottom. I was hoping that the original writing was still on there, but it's hard to get it all in the same frame. But we just have people doing everyday things, culturally in terms of eating, culturally in terms of dress, and other everyday activities. Here we have a water carrier in Jerusalem. some Burmese monks. On the back, the description was just after dinner, just after gathering their food for dinner. So you can see we have younger, older. We have Nubians in Egypt. Can I get a little more time to show right here? In Jerusalem, the Mount of Olives. Pretty impressive on either side of the wall. And here we have the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Fairly famous, right? This is the Golden Monastery of Queen Supila, Mandalay, Burma. It's amazing the architecture they have. This is the temple in Ieyasu, Nikko, Japan. So the Buddhist faith. You can see in this photograph that I did not crop as much, that it has a notation by the photographer. Try not to get the photo. All right. Now, this is the one where I like to play guess what that thing is. Looks like an X. Photograph of Mount Everest. Okay, where is it? Wow. Kind of hard to see. A little bit. You may know. Keep in mind they weren't on it. They were seeing it from Falu. That's what this indicates. It's an X. I kind of gave the answer away. Last semester when I gave this, I had a little fun with the audience and said, "What do you think it is?" Someone said an airplane. And I said, "Yeah, it's 1893. That sounds really good." You never know. So anyway, but yes, that's what that indicates is where the Everest actually was in relation to the photograph. And we have some rainbows in Japan. Those look so waterproof. And again, we have the notation down here from the photographer. It has to be cool. Then we have bathing place, Alabad, Mela, India. Give you a minute to look at that. There's a lot of detail that you can't see from where you are because there's a lot of faded information down here in terms of what you could actually see. There's more ships, more boats, and then of course more landscape. Now, this relates to the description from the previous photo, just so we're clear. Again, I gave you the typed out version rather than expecting you to be able to see from where you're sitting what it actually says in cursive. Hindu Mela, especially a holy 12-year gathering of thousands of pilgrims and fakirs who come in pilgrimage to this juncture of Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers to wash away the sins of 10,000 years. That is verbatim from what Emily Moore had written. Now, just to make sure we're clear on the sources, I wanted to let you know that my sources all are primary and they're exhibited and discussed in this presentation in terms of what's housed here in Willard Library. There are some sources that are housed in UV's archives, as well as USI's archives that relate to the Orr and Clifford families that eventually I'll get to. But I wanted to make sure you knew that we do actually have these here at Willard Library. Again, unless otherwise noted, all of my primary sources were from the Emily Orr Clifford collection, unless I said Connect 215, etc. Now, I do appreciate you coming to this presentation, and I also appreciate your support of Willard Library by attending as well as being interested in archives. And I hope that you'll come back and visit us for more information, as well as some research. We'd love to work with each and every one of you for that. I did want to leave plenty of time for Q&A. I know we're supposed to go about an hour, but I wanted to make sure I didn't bore you for
left, or did she just feel like she needed to do this before she got married? What was her thinking behind, or was it like, I don't know, I mean, was it voluntary her leaving on this trip, or was it kind of like, you need to do this before you get married? You know, your dad suggests maybe you need to do something before you hitch your wagon with this man for the rest of your life, so.
Very good question.
Yeah.
Well, surely at this time, wealthy women did go on a journey around a year for each woman when they were engaged. This was to teach them cultural formalities of other places in case there were some meetings that would happen with certain dignitaries, or in general if your husband was like George, a lawyer, and you had to know how to conduct yourself in a particular setting. That was part of the trip. And the fact that her father, her sister, and of course the former U.S. Secretary of State and his wife all were on this journey. It wasn't really so much a rebellious journey, it was more of a learning curve, if you will. Eventually, not necessarily in this information, but in the collection, I did find some invitations for Emily Orr to visit Eleanor Roosevelt in the White House. So she continued her ambassadorship, if you will, unofficial ambassadorship, I should say. Yes?
As I understood, it was Mr. Foster who was going on this trip after he was Secretary of State, and he was having many diplomatic meetings. There were many people across the world, serious people, who thought that he was going to become President of the United States. And he invited his friend Emily's father to bring his two daughters on this trip, and it was just an opportunity for experience that they just could not turn down. But that's how the trip came about.
Right, and that's something that's not in my information, so I do appreciate that. Thank you.
And I don't know if everybody here knows, but Mr. Foster's grandsons became John Foster Dulles, and what was the other one's name? The Secretary of State
Alan
and the
Dulles.
first head of the CIA, and there's a wonderful book about it that came out last year, blaming them for most of the problems.
There's a lot of information on that. Yeah, especially on the internet. But I do appreciate that piece of the puzzle. There are certain things, as many people know, that when you research, you don't always have every piece of the puzzle, and so we'll have to get together since you know about. Sounds good. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, because I don't know offhand, but how soon did she marry George after she returned to Evansville?
Well, it was October 23rd. She embarked on the journey in September. It was a 9-month-long journey, so about 4 months when she returned. I memorized that one, thank goodness. I knew someone would ask it.
Did they have children?
Yes, they did. 3.
Janis, you gotta dish the dirt on this unfaithful, because I gotta find out what happened.
I would love to tell you.
Yeah, you can tell me.
I can't just mix it up, so
Okay.
unfortunately.
So you gotta, so nobody knows how she was unfaithful or what, and has there been other letters written from his family or him to, like, he never wrote back to her?
Not to my knowledge,
Okay.
granted, I have a very small scope, just like we're dealing with a very small scope of time.
Yeah.
For her history, her timeline, as well as her family, I don't have all the answers to that.
So she was probably moving too far too fast for him to have been able to get something back to her as far as her reply goes.
Probably so, yeah. They did have some express mail that delivered, even with the steamships. It just depended on where they were docked at the time. Absolutely.
So you're still, we're searching for,
Yes. I would love to know
In
what.
that area, you leave your next address with your former hotel, then they would know when to forward mail.
There you go. Good question. Anyone else?
Could I just make a comment? They arrived first in 1835, which is when Evansville was still very, very small. And about that time founded the Orr Iron Company, which was here a long time. But they married, as families did, of their status into other prominent families, Gardens, Castleberries, Dunfersons. And just a couple of years ago, I answered a phone call one day, and it happened to be from the niece of the late Governor Robert Orr. And she said, we have some or family materials, would you like them? That's the kind of call every architect here. And of course, the late governor served on our board of trustees here at Willard. And so there are many ties to them, but we haven't thoroughly gone through all that collection yet. There is so much, and there's more coming, we've been promised. But anybody interested in all these old families, there's a lot of genealogical information in there.
One out of the Igor has been one of the families. Yes, sir.
What was the familiar relationship with Bob Orr and Emily Orr?
I wish I knew. At one point I did, but I haven't done as much on the genealogy. I wish I knew.
Possibly, she was possibly an aunt.
That's what I thought, but I didn't want to misspeak, so I'll have to research that and hopefully I get back with you on that, sir.
There's a family picture, I can't remember if it's her, but she's in the group holding him as an infant. He was born in Michigan. They traveled often, got out of the hot city during the summer months. And so, the family was from Evansville, that's where they were rooted for many generations, but he was born in Michigan, I think. But I'm pretty sure she's there.
His name.
Where did the couple live when they were in Evansville? Their home still around?
It's still there. I don't recall the actual address. I apologize. We have photographs of it, and I can get you that information later. I should know that off the top of my head,
I think First Street, Southeast First Street. There's another one somewhere else downtown that I think's not there now. I'm pretty sure that, because there are so many of those houses that have survived in the, First, Second Street down in that historic neighborhood.
but probably. Yeah. I just want to make sure I get the right address. Yeah. Definitely give me your information. I'll get you that. Perfect. Yes.
I think Emily attended Smith College. She was in one of the first classes at Smith. She did not graduate, she attended